This episode of New Politics was released on the 10th of April, 2026, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
There's a 2-week ceasefire being implemented in Iran. Is it going to hold, and who's behind the push to start it up again? And behind the scenes, who really profits from this war and who's the real beneficiary here? Because when governments talk about all of this being about international security, the real story is far more simple. This war isn't just about conflict, it's a business model of war used all around the world. I'm Eddie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis. All of this is coming up in this big episode of New Politics.
And just a reminder that New Politics is produced by independent media. We publish extended analysis each and every week. And if you value independent journalism without the influence of corporate backing, join us at newpolitics.com.au and support us directly. It's just $5 per month. You can also join up at Substack and Patreon, and all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
In the darkness of night, US bombs light up the sky in Iran. Brick by brick, buildings crashing down, moment by moment, lives lost. There's now hope that this sound, which has become a daily part of life in Iran, is on pause following President Trump's announcement to suspend bombing for 2 weeks, contingent on Iran opening the Strait of Hormuz. And while this break in attacks is providing a sliver of hope to Iranians, the fear of what could come and what could happen to their people and their culture hasn't subsided.
There is a ceasefire in place for the next 2 weeks in the war by the United States and Israel against Iran. And this has been the focus of so many people all around the world because it's affected so many countries and so many economies. But now that there is a short break in this war, and we don't know how long it will last for because Israel is continuing to bomb Lebanon at the moment, but it gives us some time to assess who actually benefits from this war. And we have to really look behind the scenes to really find this out, because while it's the governments who talk about the need for security and stability, defence contractors and energy companies have seen their share prices surge. And most of the people who do benefit are the supporters of Donald Trump and the benefactors of the Republican Party, and of course the shareholders of these defence and military companies. So war is good for business, so of course why wouldn't they support all of this? And in Australia, there's been this scramble to secure oil supplies, and we had the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese going off to Singapore to secure some supplies, and at a premium price. But David, once you start connecting all of the dots, the economics of war, the politics that's driving all of this, the military industry, and what all of this means for the future energy supplies, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this is all about supporting the business model of war. But there is a lot of people who will benefit from what's going on in Iran.
A lot of people in one sense and not very many in another. The everyday American is not benefiting. Either their children are being prepared for a draft, allegedly, or are in the armed services and are looking at being sent over to the Middle East yet again. Petrol prices are right up. In Australia, they took some of the tax off and prices fell by about 10 cents, working out to about $1 a tank. Maybe not a lot. It's not as if suddenly we can all afford petrol again. Diesel is abominable, of course. If you're a small business owner driving trucks or vans that run on diesel, your diesel price hasn't fallen at the same rate that petrol has. And of course, the cost of diesel affects the cost of groceries, it affects the cost of furniture, it affects the cost of everything, because we are reliant on the truck industry to get stuff everywhere. Now, normally at this point, the rail boosters say, see, we told you rail was better, except rail runs on diesel too. So in this case, it wasn't going to be that big of a difference. I like rail. I like trucks. I'm on nobody's side here. I'm just saying that it's hard for everybody. And the more expensive fuel prices affect the wallets of the wealthy in a positive way. They get more money. And by the wealthy, the ultra wealthy, the shareholders of various companies, and I don't want to stain every shareholder with the same brush, superannuants who've worked hard all their life and who have 40 shares in Raytheon because it's part of a superannuation package they bought 30 years ago. I'm not there to kick into your aging parents or yourself if you're listening. I am talking about the big players who have continually rorted the system. I think too that this is probably the most pointless war since World War One. World War One, it's a very hard war to explain historically. Why did it happen? World War Two, we can explain at several levels. It's philosophically, it's Nazism versus democracy and communism. Underneath that, it's the control of oil, the geopolitical control of Europe and Asia. We can see all that. World War One was a whole lot of out-of-date treaties that got activated, which is hard to explain to a modern audience. Even Bush's Gulf War II, we could at least say, yes, he was trying to sanction oil, even if that wasn't the official reason. I think the closest he came to a real official reason was they tried to kill his dad, which is hardly... The amount of organizations wanting to kill the President of the United States of America is hardly worthwhile pointing out one.
Yeah, well, it's not a good enough reason to go and completely destroy a country because someone wanted to kill your father. A little bit like the mafioso. But this is one of the big questions we constantly get asked about. We also get asked about modern monetary theory as well, but we'll get onto that pretty soon. But every decade or so, David, it seems that the United States gets involved in some kind of major conflict. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Iran, and maybe it's not every decade, it's a lot earlier than that or sooner than that, permanently involved with Israel in these ongoing wars against Palestine. But it's also a question about who benefits from all of this. And as usual, you just got to follow the money. And you do get those defence corporations like Lockheed Martin, you mentioned Raytheon before, and they've all hit the jackpot with this particular conflict in Iran. So I did a little bit of research into this. So Lockheed Martin shares were $600 per share earlier on this year, and when the war started, it jumped up to $676 per share. So that's around
11%. Yeah,
11-12%. So Raytheon shares were $145 in the middle of last year. Now they've gone up to $217 per share, and
30%.
Yeah, so it's quite a substantial increase. And when they actually hit their peak, they dropped around 8% because the shareholders, and they are mainly institutional shareholders, not mum and dad sort of shareholders, but when they hit their peak, these shares dropped around 8% because these institutional shareholders, they sold off these shares to make a profit. So cash from conflict or cash from chaos, and if you start talking about the military industry complex, you start sounding like a leftist anarchist, but this is really what's going
This hat is made of tin foil.
And so is mine.
Yeah.
But this is really how it all works. There's the governments, there's the lobbyists, there's the institutional shareholders. And this war in Iran is actually the end result. All of these wars are the end result of those military expos that we saw in Sydney and Melbourne that we've been protesting about over all of these years. And it's totally amoral. It's all insidious. And it's almost like this market-based transaction, David. Yep. War in Iran, shares will go up 30-40%, sell it off. We'll make a mozza out of all of this. And it's not just the weapons manufacturers, it's oil companies operating in the same sort of way. Companies like Exxon, cash from conflict, cash from chaos. And so war is especially good for these kinds of industries, and that sort of makes sense. That's what their business is. Then they end up donating to politics, both here and especially in the United States. So it is this nefarious link, and it's a vicious circle that just keeps going on and on and on. It's been like that throughout history, but it's more insidious today, I'd say.
Lord Rothschild, and that's a name I'm using very carefully. I'm just quoting him here. Said,
verging on the anti-Semitic there, David.
Yeah,
Better
I know.
Be careful.
I'm just quoting what he is alleged to have said, and he said the time to buy is when the blood is running in the streets, because that's how you profit. If the bombs are being sent over, if they're using the bombs, if they're selling the bullets, if they're clothing the military than profit is being made. It's a very sad and awful situation done by a person who doesn't understand what he's doing. He threatened nuclear annihilation of Iran on Wednesday, our time, and then suddenly said Iran's come to an agreement. I suspect someone has talked him down because the agreement wasn't anything near what America wanted.
Or he might have eaten one of those tacos.
He might have had one of those tacos. He's clearly out of his depth. He's clearly not able to do what he needs to do as President of the United States. As quite a few people have pointed out, he managed to get it so that the Strait of Hormuz is open and regime change in Iran, all of which would have happened anyway. And in fact, the Strait of Hormuz was already open. He closes it down, but only to American ships. They're letting through ships from every other country in the world, including, I'm pleased to say, Australia. It's still a bit hairy travelling through the Middle East to get to Europe or America or somewhere, but it's not impossible and planes are doing it. It's just you've got to be prepared that you may be delayed or stopped, which isn't ideal, of course. People's holidays aside, it's also trade, it's business, it's health. It's all of those things that have made things a bit more difficult, and you've got to allow more time and go the long way if you have to. So again, these implications are tough and they're difficult, and no one's really ever said why Iran is such a problem. Now, was it one of our commenters who said, had we had an Iranian ambassador here, Australia might have been able to deal with things a lot quicker and be in a bit better of a position. But of course, Australia recalled the Iranian ambassador for reasons that were never clear, except, the Bondi shooting and anti-Semitism. Okay. And now we're seeing the implications of kicking out an ambassador who really should be here. We have even without agreeing with theocracy and conservative theocracy and all of that, there was no reason to blow up the relationship in the way that we did. And both sides are now regretting this, I think.
Now, I don't want this to sound like the conspiracy hour, David. I'm just putting away my tinfoil hat, but it's never going to be, just looking at the business of war and that business model, but it's never going to be a case where the head of a place like BlackRock, and that's one of those big institutional shareholders that's investing in a lot of military companies all around the world. It's not like the head of BlackRock just makes phone calls to the White House and then demands a war with Iran to boost their profits. Doesn't really work like that, although with someone like BlackRock, you can never be too sure about this. But it's obvious that there are incentives there for these companies to behave in this particular way. So you don't actually need the conspiracy. That's the business model. That's the nature of war. And war is the big factor that drives this particular market. And those particular markets will be rewarded through this chaos. So that's the business as usual situation. But then when you referred to Donald Trump before, but when you throw in Donald Trump as part of this whole scenario, well, anything is possible as far as corruption and insider trading is concerned. And as we all know, Trump is a convicted felon. His entire career seems to be based around corruption and illegal activity. And if you're in this position where you can do whatever you want, pretty much under that Republican idea of the unitary executive power, where, well, their argument is, this came from Dick Cheney, but their argument is that the president is immune from any of their actions. Well, if you're in that sort of position, well, why wouldn't you exploit global instability if it benefits his donors or if it benefits himself or the Trump family? Why wouldn't you do all of these sort of things? And a lot of this behaviour that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 weeks with Iran and with Lebanon, like, it fits that sort of behaviour. Like, he takes it to the edges of the extreme and then he pulls back. And just wondering what's going on there. But it was a similar situation with the tariffs chaos from last year. That became a trading opportunity for all of Trump's mates. And I'm pretty sure that they're probably all the White House at the moment popping the champagne, because this has been a disaster for the rest of the world. But it's very, very, very good for Trump's inner circle.
To an extent, he's fired a couple of people, although they were for domestic reasons, allegedly. We're still not quite sure why he fired Kristi Noem, but...
And Pam Bondi was also
Pam Bondi.
She was fired last week.
We're still not quite sure why she was fired. The rumour is that Pete Hegseth is about to go because he's making Trump look bad. They can't justify the war. The war is going badly. I think the Iranian propaganda said they've won the war 27 times now. And yet it still goes on. Trump threatened the most horrific thing, bombing them back to the Stone Age, amongst other lesser genteel words. Back down, thankfully. But while he's there, he's still a danger to not just the United States, but the world. Mutually assured destruction is still the policy, and if a nuclear attack is launched, there will be a retaliation. And Trump doesn't seem to understand that when you do things, people will retaliate. He is the school bully. You're not going to dobble me, you little snitch. Thwack. Oh, he told on me. I'm now in trouble. What happened? Or he gathered his mates and they beat me up. Why? That's not fair. And that's Trump's whole attitude, I think. He didn't think there'd be any... He thought the strait would open and he'd be hailed as an American hero. I think has given up on getting the Peace Prize, or has this demented idea that he'll get it from causing more war. He was given the Peace Prize by this year's winner, who is the Chilean opposition leader. But that's not the same thing. I think at some level he knows that too. And of course it's this weird... competitive.
It's a weird obsession as well. Like he gives a toss about the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah. It's trying to outdo Obama, which he'll never do. Yeah, he'll never outdo Obama. He might do it if he's able to scam a third term, which I don't think he'll be able to do. I think the system's just strong enough that they'll have to do it. And if the rumours are true, and I don't know that they are, but the rumours are that Vance is going to act and activate Article 25, which allows for the removal of a president who's no longer fit for office. Johnson, for example, became president from vice president over Article 25 because Kennedy had died. So they had activated it then. There was talk with Reagan when he was shot. Maybe he wasn't, when they weren't quite sure how serious it was. He was able to come back, although towards the end of his term too, they were considering it with his senility. And there were calls with Biden. Biden's dementia was, if indeed he even had it, was nowhere near Trump's.
Well, Biden wasn't trying to blow up the world.
No,
Trump
Biden
is.
didn't walk in and think, what does this button do? Let's have some fun with it. And yet Biden, as it turned out, was pretty ill with the cancer. But there was at least eventually an acknowledgement that he was ill, which they're trying to avoid with Trump. So, yeah, Trump has started a war that he can't get out of. And as I think Midas Touch reported, even if they were all kumbaya tomorrow and all best friends again, it will still take a couple months to untangle the mess that's been made.
This is New Politics, independent analysis of Australian and international politics. For more free articles and analysis, join us at newpolitics.com.au.
Also, I think if we look at energy security, and I think it was around 30 years ago or so, maybe longer than that, many political analysts and theorists suggested that energy security was going to be a big feature of the 21st century, and we're a quarter of the way into the 21st century. And the assessment at that stage was that the countries that are able to sort this out would have a much stronger position within global politics. But it's almost like we're not clever enough to sort out these issues. And certainly I think we are being let down by our political leaders. We always get the spin and propaganda out there. We get told about security threats and national defence and all that sort of stuff, or we get things like that sugar hit that we got from Anthony Albanese last week on national television. But Australia is one of the most energy-rich countries in the world, but we've got the lowest fuel reserves in the OECD, and the recommendation generally is that you have a 90-day reserve, and Australia's only got a 30-day reserve. It might be 29 days or 30 days or thereabouts. But and David, I'm not suggesting that we drill baby drill, which is what Gina Reinhardt and Pauline Hanson want to do, but it just seems like there's this strange anomaly. We have the Prime Minister going off to Singapore to lock in some supplies because Australia just hasn't managed its resources very well. Same goes for gas as well. And we had Richard Marles saying that he was hoping to get some supplies through the Strait of Hormuz, and hoping, not saying yes, we will get some supplies, but hoping. And you referred to this before, David. If only we didn't treat the state of Iran like garbage last year and threw out the Iranian ambassador on that false evidence at the request of Israel as well, maybe we'd have a better chance of getting some of those oil supplies. And David, there is no ambassador at the moment. That's why you have ambassadors, so you can smooth over these sort of issues. And as you mentioned before, that decision to expel the Iranian ambassador, it's just looking very foolish. It was done very hastily at that time. It was done on that false evidence or the false premises. Would have been quite useful to have that guy around at the moment.
Oh, for sure. Just to assure him that Trump miscalculated. He tried to invoke NATO, and NATO said no. The NATO clause only comes into effect if you're invaded. If you invade a country, you're on your own. Then he came to Australia, and even Australia, who has said yes to everything since Korea, said not this time, let alone the South American countries and some of the African countries. Certain News Corp columnists thought that it was an act of craven betrayal that Australia didn't commit ships to the Gulf again, but they'll get over it.
Well, the issue that we're going through is that you don't expel your ambassador. That's the thing. Like it was the first time that Australia expelled an ambassador for something like 80 years or thereabouts when it happened last year. And a lot of people questioned it at the time. We questioned that decision last year, that it was all based on very flimsy evidence or manufactured evidence. We weren't actually told by ASIO why that was happening. We said that it was a foolish decision at that time, David. A lot of other people supported us. And it's looking like not just a foolish decision, but it's looking like a very crazy decision.
I don't know if you can ask them back. I suppose you can. But there'll be a lot of concessions that will have to be made. And instead of being at the front of the queue, we'll be at the back of the queue for oil, for access. Now, the Iranian government has said every country in the world is welcome to use the Gulf except America. So I assume that includes Australia. And the Iranian foreign affairs aren't particularly obtuse people. They know what was going on behind everything, so they probably don't hold that big a grudge against Australia. Having said that, I wouldn't blame them for it.
Oh, well, Iran is a pragmatic country in the same way that China is a pragmatic country as well. They deal with all the rubbish that ends up being thrown at them from the Australian media, and they understand, well, China especially, they understand, look, this is how the media plays out in Australia, this is how politics operates domestically. Iran is probably the same as well, but you just never know.
Yeah, it has put Australia into a weaker position than it should be. And if Australia wants to be a super middle power, as in we'll never be more than a middle power, but we can be a superpower in this region and then hold sway in other parts of the world by, Australia, they look after the South Pacific, we might have to listen to them. This type of action doesn't help our status at all. I think that's very fair to say. And we've gone into now probably a decade of having to mend relations. And of course, there's an Iranian population here. Now, I'll be fair, some of them are refugees from Iran, but there are people who came out of the Iranian. Do we leave them without representation to their homeland? Even if they're Australian citizens, they might still have family over there who they need to contact for whatever reason. The diplomatic roles cover a whole range of things, not just high-level trade talks, but everyday domestic issues that we've now taken away from a segment of the Australian population. And it doesn't have to be a very big segment of the population, but we shouldn't have done that.
The sales of electric vehicles are booming at the moment in Australia, David, and so are their prices. That's a separate issue, I guess. But I think generally it is a sign that more people are prepared to make a move to EVs. And it's not a simple case where people are just going to dump their petrol car and move to an EV immediately. This is more than likely the people who are on the verge of buying a new car or replacing their old one, and they've probably been thinking about EVs for some time. But it was just a few years ago that Scott Morrison said this.
The problem here is Bill Shorten doesn't understand his own policy. And in typical Labor fashion, they want to ram it down the necks of all Australians. And I'll tell you what, it's not going to tow your trailer, it's not going to tow your boat, it's not going to get you out to your favourite camping spot with your family. Bill Shorten wants to end the weekend when it comes to his policy on electric vehicles, where you've got Australians who love being out there in their four-wheel drives. He wants to say, see you later to the SUV.
So it might be a case where, far from ending the weekend, electric vehicles might be actually saving the weekend, but there is a transition that is happening. That's definitely happening. You're getting more heavy vehicles on the road. I'm seeing a lot more of those, and they're being powered by electric. We've had electric trains in Sydney for decades, David, and in all capital cities around Australia. But for me, it's a transition that just isn't happening quickly enough. Australia is still heavily exposed to the global oil markets. It was, as we found out over the past few weeks, but so are so many other countries too. But I think it's just a question of how much exposure do you want to have. And then there's the gas issue. And I talked about the responses that we get from our listeners. Gas is the big issue that a lot of people talk about. And most of the responses that we receive are about those stupid gas deals from 2005 set up by John Howard and then extended by the Rudd and Gillard governments. The Albanese government also extended one of those deals with Japan up until 2070. Now, there is that deal that was set up a 25% reserve for the eastern states in December 2025. So I guess that's a start. And we are still waiting for that renewable energy superpower to arrive. And I know it doesn't happen overnight, but where is it anyway? But this current crisis with oil supplies, I think that just has to force a change. And Australia does need to create its own energy security or become more energy secure. And it's been talked about for 30 years. And David, you know that you should never waste a crisis. And I think that this might be the start in making Australia more resilient with its energy resources, but it cannot waste this opportunity.
No doubt we will waste this opportunity, as we've wasted so many opportunities in the past. Australia is one of the sunniest countries in the world. And if you go to the New South Wales Art Gallery or the Victorian Art Gallery, any of the state art galleries or the National Gallery, all the colonial pictures are really studies in light. The artists got off the boat here and said, oh my goodness, look at this. Look at the light. And that's what they're trying to capture. Australia has an abundance of sunlight. It has an abundance of wind. It has an abundance of electricity. And of course, what Gina Reinhardt's most worried about is solar, because you can't charge for solar. It will probably be 50 to 100 years before we're completely gone off coal anyway, because there'll be engines and things that are too big to replace and what have you. But certainly, and the big resistance too is that there's a lot of misunderstanding about how an electric battery works. The sensationalists of our media say, oh, how are we supposed to run these things at night? And you just think, how do you get out of bed in the morning? How do you understand the difference between up and down? But the more subtle thinkers will argue, well, charging is an issue. You can charge them at home. Oh, but what if you drive away? You can charge them from anyone's home and anywhere there's power. And the misunderstanding was that you had to have the special recharging stations. They help, but also how far the batteries go. People will say, oh, they'll only go about 600 or 700 kilometres.
And how far will that extension cord run for as well?
Yeah.
That's a consideration too.
Yeah. But how many people drive more than 600 or 700 kilometres in a day? And of course, the hybrids are very popular. You can swap over to petrol if your battery charge is running low, or drive electricity in the city, and hybrid if you're going out of town. But my point is that people just don't think about how, or are misinformed about how efficient these are. And with Chinese companies and Spanish companies and Japanese companies and Indian companies coming out with better alternatives to the Tesla, which is the capitalist model. Thomas Edison invents the record player, and Deutsche Grammophon realised actually it's more efficient and sounds better if instead of a cylinder you lay it flat. And so we had the records. And Edison lost a fortune over because someone saw his idea and realised how they could make it better. And that's what's happened with the Tesla. Great idea. Now, I know it wasn't the first electric car and all that, but Tesla was the one who cracked the code to make it something that people would buy. And I know a few Tesla owners, and they do rave about how great the cars are. They'll say Elon aside. But people rave about their BYDs, and they've looked at what Tesla did and said, hold on, if we change this bit and we make the interior design a little bit less clunky, and we make the app that runs it a bit more sophisticated. And I think in probably 10 to 15 years' times, we'll be seeing petrol cars and diesel cars like today we might see a Model A Ford on the road. As a bit of, I haven't seen one of those in ages. Oh, how nice that is. And petrol will be hideously expensive too.
Well, that might be coming in at a good time because peak oil is coming in at around 2030, so that's just around 4 years away. And the idea of peak oil is that when the peak is reached, it will start diminishing. But there is a bit of debate about what is that question of the peak that we're looking at. What is it about peak supplies that we're reaching the absolute maximum of peak oil and then it starts to diminish, or are we looking at peak demand or peak production? So it's probably going to be a combination of all of those sorts of issues. But, whatever the case is, the world has more or less decided that oil production is a problem and we need to reduce the consumption of it. And we've had all of those COP meetings over the past 30 years. That's the general consensus. Now, we might not be very good at reducing that at the moment, the level of oil production or usage, but the world has identified that this is a problem. And of course, there's no consensus on this generally. I think most of the world does agree, but there's a certain US president who thinks that there's no problem at all. Many of the few remaining Liberal Party MPs tend to agree with Donald Trump, as does the National Party, Pauline Hanson, Gina Rinehart, Kerry Stokes, all of those sort of people. But aside from those people, there is a general agreement that less oil is better than having more oil. But the problem seemed to be that so many governments are kicking the problem down the road and leaving it for the next generation to sort out. And if we continued to apply that sort of thinking to other things, well, we never would have had the Sydney Harbour Bridge. If we left it all to future generations, we wouldn't have that many schools or hospitals because all of these things would have been left to the next generation to sort out. But it sort of has to be now, David. And about the only thing that Albanese said in that national address last week that was useful was that message to use less petrol. But it shouldn't be about using less petrol just over the next couple of months. It should be forever. And that's all well and good. But the next steps need to be fast-tracked. Energy transition. Use this crisis to force it through. The renewable energy superpower that Albanese keeps going on about. Well, use this crisis to force that through as well. And my fear is that all of these slow and piecemeal processes, they are so slow and piecemeal that when it comes to a change of government, you might laugh at it now, but we have to remember that irrespective of how well positioned a government might be, which is what the Labor government is at the moment, there's always the chance of a new government coming in at every election, and the next election is just 1 or 2 years away. So if you've got these half-hearted projects and changes that are poorly implemented, a new government can come in and say, oh, no, we don't like that, we don't need this, and they'll just get rid of it, and all of those years are wasted. And I think that's the big problem.
There's a resistance to change. There's a resistance to bold decisions. Our current political system rewards sluggishness and entropy because if you make a decision that's not popular in the short term and you risk your power in the election, that's seen as a disaster, even if it's popular in the long term or turns out, more importantly, to be the right decision. Gough Whitlam being maybe the standard bearer of multiculturalism, universal health, free education, and all the other things he brought in, which they took out universal health for a couple years, but then it was brought back in under Hawke. But multiculturalism stayed, despite the howling. Free education disappeared, and now people are saying that was a massive mistake. And it's still, the fact that we're still debating it shows just how big and important a change it was. We've come to the point where we need bold and decisiveness because the world is changing. And if you don't change, you get left behind. And we're at the point where if we're going to be left behind, it's going to be disastrous.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you value independent journalism without the influence of corporate backing, Join New Politics at newpolitics.com.au and support us directly. It's just $5 per month, and we always try to keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.